For decades, marine biologists thought the snapping sound on coral reefs came from the claws clicking together. They were wrong. In 2000, a research team in the Netherlands filmed a pistol shrimp at 40,000 frames per second and saw what was actually happening. The claw wasn't making the noise. A bubble was. A bubble that formed when the claw moved so fast it ripped the water apart, then collapsed so violently it briefly emitted light at temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The shrimp wasn't snapping. It was firing a tiny star. The animal in question is small. A pistol shrimp, depending on species, runs about 1.5 to 2 inches long. It lives on reefs and in shallow sand burrows across most of the world's warmer oceans. It has one oversized claw, which can be on the left or the right side of the body, and one normal-sized claw, which it uses the way every other shrimp uses its claws. The oversized one is the weapon. From a distance, it looks like a comically misshapen pincer. Up close, it is one of the most efficient mechanical accelerators in the animal kingdom. To understand what the Versluis team actually saw on their footage, you have to start with the geometry of the claw. The oversized claw has two halves, a lower part that stays mostly still, and an upper part that cocks open at almost 90 degrees, like a tiny hammer pulled back. There is a small peg on the upper part that fits into a matching socket on the lower part. When the shrimp wants to fire, it loads the claw against an internal latch, builds up tension, and then releases. The upper part slams shut. The peg drives into the socket at a speed that, in older textbooks, was always described as just very fast. Just very fast turned out to be the wrong way to think about it. The closing speed of the claw, when the Versluis team finally pinned it down, is somewhere around 20 meters per second at the tip. That is fast for a shrimp, but it is not the part that matters. What matters is what 20 meters per second does to the water sitting in the path of the peg. Liquids cannot be compressed the way air can, but they can be pulled apart. When the upper part of the claw slams down, it shoves water out of the gap at extreme speed. Behind that water, where the moving claw has just been, there is a pocket of negative pressure. Not vacuum exactly, but pressure low enough that the water there cannot hold itself together as a liquid. It boils, at room temperature. Because the pressure has dropped low enough that boiling becomes the path of least resistance. That is cavitation. It is the same effect that chews up boat propellers and pump impellers in engineering applications. And it is the reason the inside of a high-speed pump eventually looks like it was attacked with sandpaper. A bubble of water vapor forms in a low-pressure pocket. The surrounding water tries to close back in around the bubble, and when it does, the collapse is violent enough to do mechanical damage to whatever surface is sitting nearby. The pistol shrimp has turned that engineering nuisance into a weapon. The peg and socket geometry is shaped so the jet of water leaving the closing claw produces a cavitation bubble at a predictable spot, just outside the claw itself, aimed at whatever the shrimp wants to hit. The bubble forms, lasts for a fraction of a millisecond, and then collapses inward. The collapse is the part the shrimp cares about. The mechanical shock wave that comes out of the collapsing bubble is loud enough and fast enough to stun small fish, kill prey at close range, and crack open small shells. The claw, in other words, is not the weapon. The claw is the trigger. The weapon is the bubble. That alone would have been a significant finding. The bubble is the kill. The claw is just a very fast spring-loaded mechanism for making the bubble appear. But the Versluis paper, published in Science in 2000, went one step further, and the further step is where the story gets strange. When the team examined the collapsing bubble more carefully, they found that the inside of the bubble, for the briefest instant just before it disappears, gets extraordinarily hot. According to the Versluis and Lohse follow-up work, the gas trapped inside the collapsing bubble reaches temperatures in the neighborhood of 4,700 degrees Celsius. The surface of the sun, for comparison, sits at around 5,500 Celsius. For roughly 1 nanosecond, the interior of a tiny bubble produced by a 1.5-inch shrimp matches the thermal conditions of a stellar surface. The surrounding seawater stays cold. The heat is locked inside a volume so small and a duration so short that it never has time to leave. A bubble that hot does something else that scientists had only previously observed in laboratory acoustics experiments. It emits a brief flash of light. The phenomenon is called sonoluminescence, and a follow-up paper by Lohse, Schmitz, and Versluis in Nature in 2001 named it shrimpoluminescence in the pistol shrimp's honor. Sonoluminescence had been studied for decades in physics labs, where researchers were generating ultrasound-driven cavitation bubbles in flasks of water and watching the flashes come out. The pistol shrimp was producing the same effect in the wild, without any human equipment, every time it fired its claw at a passing fish. If you are enjoying this little gunslinger as much as I am, hit subscribe. More stories like this on the channel every week. The sound is the part fishermen and submariners knew about long before anyone had a high-speed camera. A coral reef under sonar sounds like a constant, crackling roar, the way oil pops in a hot pan. During the Second World War, submarine crews trying to listen for enemy ships sometimes had to navigate around reefs because the background snapping was loud enough to interfere with passive sonar. The cause of the crackle was a mystery for years. The dominant theory before the cavitation work was that thousands of pistol shrimp were clicking their claws against each other. They are not. Each individual shrimp is generating a miniature shockwave by collapsing a bubble of water vapor, and the cumulative noise from a large colony is loud enough to drown out a destroyer's hydrophones. The pressure level of an individual snap is one of the loudest sounds, pound for pound, that any animal in the ocean produces. A pistol shrimp snap measures around 218 decibels in the water near the claw. That is not louder than a sperm whale, which is the actual record holder among marine animals at around 230 decibels, but it is extraordinary for an animal of this size. A sperm whale stretches roughly the length of a school bus. The pistol shrimp fits on a fingernail and is matching the same scale of sound output with a body that small. The mechanics of how the claw stores and releases that much energy involve a kind of biological latch. The shrimp does not just contract a muscle to swing the claw. The slow muscle in the upper part of the claw builds up tension over several seconds, the way an archer draws a bow, and a small mechanical catch holds the claw open against that tension. When the shrimp decides to fire, a release muscle disengages the catch, and the stored tension fires the claw shut at a speed the muscle alone could never produce. It is the same trick that mantis shrimp use to throw their hammer-shaped appendages, and the same trick that trapjaw ants use to snap their mandibles closed. Slow loading, fast release. Biology has invented latch mechanisms several times in animals that share almost no other anatomy, because the physics of a stored tension snap is just too useful to ignore. A 2017 paper in Scientific Reports went back and looked more carefully at the cavitation bubble itself, using updated imaging, and confirmed that the bubble dynamics matched what the Versluis team had described. The jet leaving the claw, the bubble forming, the collapse, the shockwave, the brief flash, the surrounding water staying cool. The whole sequence, captured frame by frame, plays out in roughly 300 microseconds. For perspective, that is about 1,000 times faster than the blink of a human eye. What the pistol shrimp is doing then is running a small acoustic and thermodynamic event that physics labs spend serious money to reproduce in flasks. Except the shrimp is doing it every time it gets hungry. It is firing a cavitation weapon. The trigger is a claw. The projectile is a bubble. The kill mechanism is a shockwave. The byproduct is a flash of light at sun surface temperatures. And the entire system is packed into a body smaller than your thumb, running on shrimp metabolism, fully operational for tens of millions of years before any human noticed what was actually going on. Before 2000, the question of what was making that crackling noise on the reef was a long-standing scientific puzzle. The biologists assumed the claws were clicking. The acoustics people assumed it was something to do with the shells. Nobody had filmed it fast enough to see. When the Versluis team finally pointed a 40,000 frame per second camera at the right shrimp and slowed the footage down, they could see the bubble appear, hover for a fraction of a millisecond, and then collapse into the shockwave that everyone had been hearing all along. The mystery, in retrospect, had been a question about fluid dynamics dressed up as a question about animal behavior. The shrimp was not the noisy one, the water was. That is the part that even now, 25 years after the original paper, still feels disproportionate. A 1.5-inch animal evolved a claw shape that exploits the same low-pressure physics that engineers spend their careers trying to design away from. It built a tiny acoustic gun out of cavitation. It produced a side effect of light and temperature at the scale of a stellar surface, and it did all of this in seawater, on a reef, while doing nothing more dramatic than reaching for lunch. The next time you hear the snapping crackle of a reef on an underwater recording, it is worth remembering that what you are listening to is not animals making noise. It is hundreds of small bubbles being born and dying in the same instant, each one carrying enough collapsing energy to flash for a nanosecond at thousands of degrees, and then going quiet before the water around it has a chance to notice. If you found this fun, there are more stories like this on the channel. See you in the next video.